All right. Thank you so much, Patricia. Hello, everybody. Good morning. My name is Tony. Patricia, you did pronounce the two last names correctly, so that's good. Thank you. So my name is Tony Perez Soto. I'm a student from Costa Rica. I'm in my first semester at the Gray School of Applied Diplomacy. I'm pursuing a master's program on applied diplomacy with a concentration on migration. Previously to doing this program in Chicago, I studied in Iowa for 4 years, where I graduated with a double major on political science and German. I am right now located in Costa Rica due to the COVID situation, and I'm taking classes from my home country. And I'm very, very excited for this panel and for all the conversations that have been going on. So without further ado, I will introduce the two presenters for this session. If I do happen to mispronounce their names, please correct me. So first we have Lydia Stazen or Stazen. I wouldn't know exactly how that last name is pronounced. She serves as an executive director of the Institute of Global Homelessness. Lydia has dedicated her career to building a world where all people have a place to call home and a strong foundation upon which they can build the lives they envision for themselves. Lydia has held executive leadership roles in anti-poverty organizations across the Midwest, focusing on housing, employment, education, and policy advocacy.
Okay, I think I'm up first. Hi, everyone, from a sunny Saturday morning here in Chicago. It's really great to be with all of you today. I see a lot of familiar faces from the UN NGO Working Group to End Homelessness and others from the DePaul University community. So great to be spending this time with you today. And thank you, Tony, for the introduction. I often think of what the Institute of Global Homelessness does around the world as applied diplomacy. So hopefully you'll be able to see some of those connections in our work today. I'm going to be sharing my screen, so bear with me for a moment. And we'll just go through a few slides. Okay, you all should be able to see that now. Can you give me a thumbs up if you do? Okay, great. Just gonna make it go full screen here. Okay, so when the Institute of Global Homelessness thinks about sustainability, we're thinking about it in very broad terms. We're not just thinking about the ecology or environment, but we're thinking about all the dimensions of what makes an intervention sustainable. So that includes several different spheres, several different dimensions, including, certainly the ecology and environment, but also what is the economic sphere that is connecting to this? What is the social sphere that's connecting to this? What are all of the different levels and interlinkages that exist around this particular issue? So that's what we think about when we're saying sustainable. What is a sustainable response to homelessness? And I think really embedded in those principles are these wonderful Vincentian values that we've been hearing about and engaging with really all weekend. So just a real quick snapshot about the Institute of Global Homelessness. So we were founded just 6 years ago by two Vincentian organizations, one being DePaul University, where IGH is housed, and the second being an organization called DePaul International, founded by Mark McGreevy. And DePaul International does direct service work for people experiencing homelessness in I think 8 or 9 different countries at this point. Two of the wonderful St. Vincent de Paul quotes that always come to my mind when I think about what IGH is trying to accomplish in the world are, it's not enough to do good, it must be done well, and there is great charity, but it is badly organized. I think both of those statements as true today as they were in St. Vincent's Day as well. And really, IGH was designed to link advocacy, frontline practice, and knowledge research. So again, we're seeing the sustainability embedded into IGH's design. So how are these different areas of work around the issue of homelessness linking together and reinforcing each other? So IGH, we have 3 different strategic priorities. And again, I hope you can see the links between these 2. So our first priority we call See It. And that is really the work that we do at the United Nations with members of the working group who are on this call today, really advocating for international homelessness policy focused on definition and measurement. We need to make the invisible visible to those who, set the sustainable development goals and set international policy and set targets for the world to achieve together. Homelessness is missing there. And so we're trying to bring that to the forefront. Our second strategic priority we call Solve It, where we work in deep partnership with 13 cities around the world in 6 different countries that are really ready to take concrete action to end homelessness. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And then our final strategic priority is Share It. So how are we connecting with each other, all the people who work on this really important issue, to share the innovations, to share the knowledge, and to continue to drive progress forward. This is a picture of the communities around the world where we work. And again, one of the very important principles of sustainable development is about engaging with the people who live in those communities. They are experts in their context. It's not up to IGH to tell them exactly how to do something or to bring a very colonial approach to this. No, rather we want to come behind and support these communities in their important efforts, in the work that they've already done, and to really serve as a catalyst for that progress through connections, through knowledge sharing. So really bringing that lens of partnership and capacity building for people who live in those communities and work in those communities. We've also designed our cohort of cities to be time limited. We work with a community for about 3 years, and we provide actually very little financial resource so that they don't become, dependent on a monetary form of assistance. But again, bringing those values of partnership to the work. One of the very first things that IGH did when we were first started was to work with some really prominent researchers on the issue of homelessness to design this framework for defining what homelessness is. We want to be very respectful and understanding of the fact that homelessness looks different across contexts. And so coming up with these descriptions of what it can look like is very useful for us. We have used this framework in all of the communities where we work. It allows us to establish some common language around the issue, to describe the issue, and then to be able to help enhance or come up with some solutions for people who are experiencing these types of homelessness. For example, someone who is experiencing homelessness such as described in 1A, people sleeping on the street, need different services than people who are living in category 3H, where they're living in non-conventional buildings or sort of slums and informal settlements. The interventions are different. And so we really think that this is a sustainable way of thinking about the issue, because it allows for, kind of the realities of the work on the ground. It allows for this kind of definition to expand or change over time. I think about our colleagues in Finland who essentially have ended homelessness, such as is described in 1A. They have very, very few people who are experiencing homelessness that's described in 2A. They have very few night shelters. And so when you ask people who are working on the issue in Finland what kind of homelessness they're describing, they are describing people who are experiencing homelessness in 3A and 3G. And so I think it's a lovely way of a sustainable way of using these definitions, so that as a community really addresses one, they can move on to addressing a different type of homelessness. That adaptability being a really key component of what it means to do sustainable work. I always think it's fun if we can use the chat. So if you want to be posting in the chat, what kinds of homelessness you see wherever in the world you live, and what you might add to this framework based on your own context. Finally, again, when we think about the different spheres of sustainable development, we think about the economic sphere, we think about the environmental sphere, and we think about the social sphere as well. So I've done a bit of a brainstorm and applied these spheres specifically to the issue of homelessness. So thinking about the economic sphere, obviously a huge problem in addressing homelessness is how housing has been commoditized. It is not looked at as a human right that ought to be extended to the citizens of any given country, but rather it's a way for developers to make money. And so that's why we see, I can draw on the example here in Chicago, where we have a law on the books that any new kind of housing development needs to have a certain percentage of units put aside for what's called affordable housing here. So that would be a unit where a person doesn't pay more than 30% of their income. But there's a loophole in that developers can pay a fee and get out of that requirement, and the majority of time developers choose to pay that fee because they know that what they can make every sort of month in renting out that unit, at a luxury kind of market rate is going to more than make up what they paid for in that fee. So, as long as housing is really used as a way for people to make money, it's going to be very, very difficult for us to truly end homelessness. We also think about other kind of economic factors such as low wages. In the United States, for example, if you are working a full-time minimum wage job, you cannot afford a 2-bedroom market rate apartment in any one of our 50 states. So this idea of low wages and sort of entrenched poverty really being obvious in the issue of homelessness. Access to capital, access to, banks that will provide mortgages, that sort of thing. So thinking about that economic sphere, very important when it comes to homelessness. When we think about that social sphere, I think about the exclusion and the stigma that people who are experiencing homelessness face. People who enter homelessness are often dealing with multiple levels of oppression or marginalization, whether that be racism or gender discrimination, or pick your ism. If you are a member of one of these marginalized groups, you are more likely to be in the homelessness population. And so we need to think about that. What is your access to community resources? Do you have access to education, job training, mental health services, physical health services if you have some kind of a physical disability? What's your connection into the social fabric of the community and the resources that may or may not be available to you? Then we think about the environmental sphere as well. Climate change is becoming an increasing driver of people into homelessness as they need to kind of migrate or move away from places where the climate is becoming unlivable. I think something like 15 million people are displaced on average in any year because of climate events. And we anticipate that's only going to increase over time. Another way of thinking about the environment is poor quality housing, and how poor quality housing can really affect a person's health, a person's ability to live a full life. And then also there I would put this category of sort of land use and land rights, which in many parts of Africa and South America and other places around the world is really not accessible to most people and causes their sort of homelessness and itineracy. So thinking through those different spheres has to be embedded into any intervention we're thinking about applying in terms of homelessness if we really want to kind of hit that center of these circles and reach sort of true sustainability. So again, in the chat, what else would you put into these different spheres? What would you add into the economic sphere or the social sphere or the environmental sphere? So some of the things that we think about at IGH when we are doing this work and thinking about what is a sustainable end to homelessness. What does that mean? What does that look like? So some of the touch points for us are, first, are we meaningfully partnering with people who have experienced homelessness? I have been blessed enough to never have experienced homelessness myself. And so it would be foolish of me to think that I could possibly begin to have the answers on this. So bringing people who have actually experienced homelessness into the dialogue from the beginning, not as an afterthought, not as a box to check, not in a tokenistic kind of way, but really working in partnership with them to help develop these solutions, is what's going to have the most positive impact. We can also think about sort of the metrics of what sustainability might look like. Are fewer people becoming homeless in the first place? Is the length of time people are homeless decreasing? Once people are housed, are they staying housed, or do they cycle back into homelessness, and why? And are continued resource efficiencies being found? Is the system right-sizing? Again, I draw on the example of our colleagues in Finland, really, because they're doing the best in the world at this. But as they ended their street sleeping definition of homelessness, they were able to shrink their shelter system. So now they really have very few emergency shelter beds. They've been able to size that crisis response in the right way, so that, as soon as somebody becomes homeless in Finland, they're able to be immediately put into the shelter and then very quickly moved on to their permanent accommodation. So the focus becomes not on the crisis response, but on expanding the permanent solution to the problem. So that's what I mean by sort of right sizing. Are we focusing on the correct aspects of making sure that individuals are able to be safely and sustainably housed? I would ask again in the chat, what other questions would you use to guide your development of a sustainable end to homelessness? Then also I think about our work again at the United Nations. So we have these 17 wonderful, aspirational, motivational, and powerful sustainable development goals. There are 17 goals. There are 169 indicators, and homelessness is not mentioned one time. And so for us, that's a really important oversight that needs to be corrected. The closest we get to talking about homelessness is under SDG 11, which is about, I should have looked up the exact terminology of SDG 11, but it's about sustainable cities in urban environments. And the closest we get there is in one of the indicators that talks about adequate and affordable housing. But what happens with that language, because homelessness is not explicitly called out, is it creates really kind of a donut hole effect. If you think of a donut and the hole in the middle, there are definitely important strategies for ensuring adequate housing. There's important strategies for ensuring affordable housing, but those interventions are different than the interventions that you would develop and implement for people who are experiencing homelessness. And so, in all of our advocacy work, we are trying to connect the issue of homelessness to all of these SDGs because it intersects with all of them. Homelessness is, a really visible manifestation of economic inequality, of poverty. It's tied to food security. It's tied to health. It's tied to education. It's really tied to all of these things. And so, that's the work we'll be doing over the next 10 years in that first kind of bucket of See It, is to build the case over the last 10 years towards achieving these SDGs, so that whenever the next set of international development goals are created, that homelessness will be included, that it will be, that issue will be lifted up, and some significant steps globally taken forward to ending it. So again, that's just another way that the work of IGH fits into kind of global sustainability efforts. So obviously we have big goals. We need a lot of help. So we hope that all of you on the call today will join us. You can find us certainly at our website, also on all of the social media platforms. I'm just going to stop my screen share here and see what folks have kind of put into the chat. Pat is saying the chart's great. Can you tie those different types of homelessness to impact of climate change? Absolutely. I think certainly when we think about internally displaced persons, when we think about migrants and refugees, certainly climate change is tied to that. Professor Ramanath, nice to see you on the Zoom today. SDG 13, climate disasters and homelessness, and 17, which is this idea around partnerships, multi-sector partnerships to achieving it. So again, thinking through, all of those different links and different ways to be working. Tony has SDG 11, exactly, sustainable cities and communities. So there are different parts of the SDGs that connect into the issue of homelessness. But it's not specifically mentioned, and we can talk. I could talk for a lot longer about the power dynamics as to why that issue wasn't mentioned and all of that. But again, bringing and making the invisible visible through the data, through the SDGs, and into the global kind of awareness is something that we take very seriously. So I'm sure I'm way over my time. I will cede the floor, but do stay in touch if you have other questions. Please throw those into the chat and I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lydia. And I think, Carol, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Awesome.
Thank you, Lydia. It's good to see your face. We've talked on the phone, but haven't seen you in person. So it's a pleasure to be with all of you today. And I'm so glad to be part of this virtual Vincentian Family Conference. My story, my presentation is going to be a little bit different from what we've been hearing. When Pat first talked with me about the Vincentian Family Conference, and we were talking, she asked if I would share my personal story on how I came to be involved in sustainability. And we got into a lot of conversations. So maybe at the beginning, I want to say that as I talk, I'm also thinking of the words integral ecology, ecological conversion, the call to Laudato Si, because I've done a lot of thinking, especially with Laudato Si being promulgated for 5 years now, it's been out. Where do we as Vincentian family, where do we who really have a strong, or rooted in the charism of charity, where do we stand in terms of Laudato Si? So this isn't that easy to read, as Pat has put up. It's on the poster board. But since I've been thinking about this a lot, you can see that I did this poster, Living into a Collaboration, a Vincentian Laudato Si perspective. And I use love, relationships, and the fact that contemplative awareness, attitude, and intention, do we see this as prayer? How important those aspects are, and the comprehensive compassion that Brian Swim talks about, that we're evolving since the very beginning of the universe. We're evolving into this comprehensive compassion, and what is our role as humans to even bring it further. So when Pat asked me to share my story, I said, let me do it from this idea of living into collaboration and what it might look like from a Laudato Si Vincentian perspective. And first I have to say, since I first joined the conference, since yesterday afternoon, I have been so totally inspired, because I see the stories that I've heard, the things that you and others have shared, being very much collaborative efforts. The word collaboration might not have been mentioned, but I don't think these projects, these programs, these initiatives would have happened unless there was a lot of effort towards collaboration. So I just want to hold up that we as Vincentian family are already collaborating. We're doing a lot of it. And I do believe, and we know, that living and working into a sustainable future for our children will require a lot of collaboration. So one of the questions I just invite us to think about as I talk and tell some of my stories is, how does our charism of charity call us to collaboration as we move more into this 21st century? How does the charism of charity lay a values foundation for the why and the how of collaboration? Because I think we as Vincentian family with our charism of charity have a lot to offer by way of collaboration and what it truly means. So let me just share some vignettes. And Pat, it's okay if you take it down, and maybe it's nice if we see each other as I'm talking. And again, Lydia suggested you can put comments in the chat box if anything resonates with you with what I'm saying. I want to begin with living in a New York City housing project that had many challenges for me, especially since I felt more like a country girl and not an urban dweller. The sun reflecting on the red bricks of the Edenwell housing project spoke to me of beauty amidst loud music seeping through thin walls in closely crowded quarters, and certainly much more going on in the projects. The toxic pesticide, because this was in the 50s, the toxic pesticide spewing forth a fine mist from a small truck traveling in and around the 3-story and 14-story buildings once a month made me gag. And this was my introduction to DDT. My second story involves the families and teen parents I got to know as a social worker in Yonkers and East Harlem in the 70s and early 80s. They rooted me in the deep knowledge and understanding of what it means to be brothers and sisters to each other. Where one suffers, we all suffer. Where one is joyful, we all share in the joy. We truly became the body of Christ, blessed, broken, and shared as we accompanied and journeyed with each other. The sisters, because there were many sisters in East Harlem, working there at the time, the families, parents, and children. I got to see firsthand many environmental injustices, certainly environmental health problems such as asthma. And then I moved forward to the year 2000 when I was asked, for me it was an ideal job, when I was asked to begin an ecological and spiritual center at the foot of Hook Mountain, nestled in the Palisades overlooking the majestic Hudson River. I spent only 2 years there and left because of a lack of funding. The funding grant ran out. But it was there that my understanding of the body of Christ expanded out to the entire Earth community and beyond. The study, reading, and conversations with others around the universe story that Brother Kevin Qualley really spoke of so beautifully yesterday, and the direct experience of being in relationship and connected to the land, the air, the water, and snakes and hawks and turkeys and other wildlife made real for me the Earth community to which we all belong. My life experiences have expanded and stretched my understanding of what the body of Christ means. And in some ways, I just mentioned 2 of those experiences because these and so many other relationships that I've had with humans and non-humans over these many years helps keep me steadfast and faithful to the way of sustainability, to the work that needs to be done in terms of an ecological conversion for myself, to really live a mutually enhancing Earth-human relationship. So I bring my story now to 3 current collaborations I am involved in. And I'm only focusing on the ones that are more environmental, so to speak, but I appreciated what Lydia said because in my role, I work with many people, and Sister Teresa Cotteran's, the Sister of Charity Federation NGO representative is on in this conference, and some other NGO representatives and so many other colleagues. And so it's really important, and Lydia's presentation showed this, that when we talk about sustainability, integral ecology, it's how we connect all the issues, be it human trafficking, be it poverty, immigration, certainly the economic disparity that we're seeing, the racial injustice. So it's all connected, and we all need to be looking at this. But I'm focusing a little bit more on more the traditional environmental, so to speak. The 10-year-old cosmological spirituality group that meets 9 or 10 years a year up in a rural Northeast Dutchess County area is where we have the Sisters of Charity Sisters Hill Farm. It's a community-supported agriculture. But many, many years ago, I was asked to go up there to see what we can do with some of the other housing property that we had. And in doing some research, one of the area residents asked me, so what are you interested in when you are not doing your ministry? And so I told her the universe story. So her curiosity led to having a few programs for the residents up there, which grew into monthly conversations that have lasted for 10 years, which now average at least 10 people at our monthly meetings. They're now Zoom meetings during this COVID-19 time. And this group has gone from exploring what it means to be a Catholic through the lens of the universe story and Laudato Si, and how we are called to respond. And each of us is helping each other move to a greater awareness and appreciation of awe, and really grow into life-giving, sustainable attitudes and actions. These are gifts we have given each other. I don't have time to illustrate how each member of that group, in different ways, their idea of sustainability has expanded. One of them lives in Vermont, is working with the Burlington, the Diocese, I think, of Burlington and her parishes. So it's just amazing how it just has expanded out. The other group that I want to mention, and again, these are all groups that are done very collaboratively. Religious organizations along the river, ROAR, is over 24 years old. I've actually belonged to it for most of those years in my many, many other my past lives. And so about 16 women and men religious congregations are members of ROAR. 4 times a year, representatives from these congregations gather for about 3 hours with lunch following. We pray, learn, listen, share together, and take action as members of the Hudson River bioregion, as well as the global community. Over the years, we have been active in the campaign to get General Electric remove the PCBs from the Hudson. We played a role in the Shad Restoration Act, the banning of fracking in New York State, the advocacy to stop barges from transporting crude oil up and down the Hudson. We are still working on stopping the expansion of pipelines. Unfortunately, the Algonquin pipeline we weren't too successful with. That is a pipeline that is just within a mile of Indian Point nuclear energy plant. And even though it's now closed, it still presents a lot of potential problems. We certainly joined with many groups to advocate for Indian Point's closure, and we're still working with them around a safe closure. And because we know that the nuclear waste will remain radioactive for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and also for a just transition of workers to other jobs. This group focuses on the call Laudato Si, and certainly has tried to raise awareness of it. So now I'd like to talk about, just briefly, the next group, the Metro New York Catholic Climate Movement, and it's a very unique group. We do not have anything official in the Archdiocese of New York around Laudato Si, or even the raising awareness of it and mentioning it. It is not something that happens in our diocese. So this group, it actually grew out of national faith leaders being at calls in preparation for the People's Climate March way back in 2014. And eventually, as we got closer and closer to the September March, we realized that the faith leaders had dwindled down to only faith leaders in the Metro New York area. And so after that march, we decided that we would still keep in touch. And lo and behold, we then had Laudato Si being published and the Global Catholic Climate Movement starting. So we actually got very connected and became a local chapter of the Global Catholic Climate Movement. We have continued to this day, getting stronger and stronger. Since the beginning, we've hosted monthly meetings. We have a larger steering committee now that does meet on Zoom right now once a month. Before it was conference calls. We have parishes in Brooklyn and in various areas of the New York Archdiocese that are involved. We do have communications with 2 liaisons in the New York Catholic Charities office. That is the group that when we tried to communicate with Cardinal Dolan, he, the Archdiocese of New York is tremendous. So he asked that these 2 liaisons from Catholic Charities be our liaisons. And there is a collaboration with them. They, in fact, gave us money, $5,000 grant, for us to host 2 years ago a large gathering of people from the Metro New York area interested in Laudato Si and in exploring ways to network and collaborate together. So that helped strengthen our Metro New York Catholic Climate Movement. We had over 100 participants at that meeting, and it was an awful, awful, rainy, windy day where there was a lot of flooding on the streets of New York. So it's amazing that 100 people made it. So we've worked certainly around bringing people to rallies, marches, signing cities, statewide, nationwide petitions, participating with Green Faith. That's a faith-based organization. You may know about it in some of their events. Educating on the Green New Deal. We're currently educating ourselves and involved in the Climate Crisis Policy Project that's trying to bring together all the different proposals and even some of them, I guess, are maybe in proposed laws now in our Congress, U.S. Congress. How can there be a more unified, concerted effort to look at all these things that deal with climate change in one way or another? How can we look at it more as a piece? So the Metro New York Catholic Climate Movement has many challenges, especially that it's grassroots, works with volunteers who have other jobs. We're working with a large area. It has no official organizational ties, but we are working to strengthen and develop relationships among Catholic leaders, among parishes in our Metro New York area, and we keep moving forward. So I'd just like to say that I've mentioned these groups, and there's so many other groups I work with. We do a lot of awareness raising, education, advocating, working for systemic change. And isn't that a gift of who we are as Vincentians, both the personal, the relational, and the systemic change, how it really is married together. And I think I look forward to reading Fratelli Tutti because I think that has a lot of Vincentianness in it. So I'm looking forward to that. But many of us, since Laudato Si was first promulgated, are really trying to see how we can keep moving forward. What does it mean to work from an integral ecology perspective? What does it mean to truly have an ecological conversion? Because that is what's going to sustain us both individually and in our working with groups and in our collaboration, keep us working over the long haul. So I feel, and this conference certainly inspires me because I feel that the company of charity truly is hearing and responding to the cry of the earth and its people and responding in hope. And often we hear about the Franciscan response. We do not hear about the Vincentian response. So that's why I'm really glad to be part of this conference. So I just move forward now as I conclude that my story is very much linked to the future of the company of charity. And I believe collaboration is the way of the future. and that collaboration needs to be rooted in a deep understanding. And this, for me, comes from the Lydias Story of what love truly means, the importance of relationships, of our need to grow in contemplative awareness and attitudes, intentions, and what does it really mean to move towards a comprehensive compassion. The universe teaches us about this. I think we, as a part of the company of charity, are called to be collaborative these ways. So I just invite us to lead with values and bring this information, these values into our conversation and how we might grow into living them into the future. And I just end with leaving us all with the question that Vincent de Paul asked the sisters in his conferences. And what do you think, my sisters? And of course, we are here today, so he would say, what do you think, my sisters and brothers? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol. I really appreciate that presentation, and thank you so much, Lydia, again. So I would like to remind everybody in this Zoom call that questions are welcome. So if you could please text those in the chat, that would be amazing. So I personally have a very huge interest for the issue of homelessness. And obviously as a youth, I also find the issue or like the topic of sustainability is something very important, right? I think that to me, something that has like caught my attention, especially in the previous plenary, was this idea of the common good, right? And like how that sense of the common good is somehow not quite there in different contexts, in different cities, in different circles, right? Particularly when we talk about the US context. So my question for both of you, Lydia and Carol, would be, first, like how do you envision, I mean, because you both talk about collaboration, right? So like how do you find that sense of common good, in the collaborations that you have, but also beyond that? Meaning, how do you organize with local organizations, governments, cities, and all of that across your environment? But ultimately, how do you reach the people individually, right? Because one thing, of course, is to organize with a group that already exists, but another thing is to touch upon individuals themselves. So I think that with that in mind, what do you see to be the role of the youth, right? Because both of you talk about future, right? And when we talk about the future, we also need to talk about the generations that we have right now, right? And if we were to say, well, we want this to be carried on, we'll need to make sure that we're providing the youth or like getting involved with the youth in the initiatives that you both talked about. So could you please both expand a bit more on that?
Do you want to go first, Carol, or shall I take a stab at it?
Why don't you take a stab, because maybe, I don't know if you'll be more specific. I'll talk some of the challenges of collaboration and how we open ourselves up to it.
Yeah, great. So when I think about the idea of the common good, I think about how really government has failed to make sure that housing is extended to all of a country's citizens. And I think that's really in direct response to sort of the business and the real estate development lobby pushing really strongly. Like, we should think about housing as a common good, even beyond the philosophy of the common good. And so government in that instance has failed to kind of correct the marketplace where it's really overstepping its bounds, as capitalism loves to do. And so, the response to that then is, I think, advocacy and civil society really kind of coming up as the third sector to challenge the other two sectors where they have really certainly failed. In terms of collaboration in homelessness, what we have found to be the most successful kind of strategy in terms of ending homelessness is when there are multi-sectoral stakeholder groups that are regularly coming together, that are claiming the end of homelessness not as any one individual agency's goal, but as a city's goal, a community's goal, or a region's goal. So kind of putting aside that individual agency ego of like, we are going to be the best agency, we are going to serve the most people, but thinking about how the system and the city and all the players can be working together towards this goal. And then your question around youth, I think is a really important one. We certainly see, the United Nations and advocacy groups, et cetera, talking about the importance of youth. But I think that they often, I think about Greta Thunberg, right, often held up as a really important youth activist on the issue of climate change and the incredible work she's done to raise awareness. And yet youth are not given positions of power, right, where they can make the change that needs to be made. When I look at, for example, the United States government and how, if you look at the ages of the people who are holding those positions of power, 77, 80 years old, 84 years old, and these are people who have been in positions of power for a really long time. And so it's not enough just to involve the youth voice, but we also have to think about how we give the youth the power to make those decisions, and that's a much harder thing to do. So I think of it in terms of how the work that we do at IGH to involve people with the lived experience of homelessness as partners in the work. We also are trying to involve young people as partners in the work from the beginning of sort of program design all the way through to implementation and evaluation. How are we bringing those people to the table and giving them equal power at the table?
Thank you, Lydia. Thank you. So some of the thoughts that came to my mind, Tony, and hopefully what I say will also have some, touch what others, their experience. But I guess the first thing that does come to my mind around collaboration is I did graduate from Yeshiva University, at least from the social work school. And one of the first things they said was, you've got to meet people where they're at. You have to meet people where they're at. And that really has stayed with me over these many, many years. And then that kind of became even more, if you want to say, broken out when I did a lot of studying around Peter Senge's work on the learning organization and Otto Scharmer with the U theory. And I won't go into it, but I think one of the challenges in terms of collaboration is we really have to, how do we move from our own personal mission, vision, hopes, expectations to a group, to the group's mission and vision. And so that's not easy to do. And so when we're collaborating, it really is working with a lot of different people or a lot of different organizations, and where do you fit in? And there's a lot of power plays there. And so part of it is also the practitioner, because that's what and I think this is, when we think about St. Vincent de Paul, what must be done, in a sense, we are practitioners. And we have to learn to be practitioners in terms of how do we, in our relationships, not only model, but we help encourage also what I showed in that pamphlet, in that handout. How do we model truly the mutual, inclusive way of relating, and not the power over, but the power with. The power of emergence, as Joanna Macy has written. So, so when you talk about collaboration, to me, a lot of those things go into it. And that's why I have to say, this is a prayer. Collaboration is not just our work. It has to become our prayer. It has to become our way of acting. And as I say this, probably why it is so, it's become so real to me is I realize I don't do it that well sometimes. I'm sure when I want to get something done, I'm trying to force it and move it along. And so it's very hard to be there listening for others. And the gift of the collaboration is if we can be open and listen, the new emerges, there's something new. It's not my idea, it's this new idea. And I just want to, I had written down, you know, I have to say, and I'll just say it here, it's hard work, it's very tiring, it's very overwhelming. There's a real difficulty in letting go of owning the event. Sisters of Charity, for instance, when I talked about ROAR, when I talked about Metro New York Catholic Climate Movement, that is not a Sisters of Charity sponsored ministry anymore. It isn't. It is the new group's ministry, so to speak. And that's very hard then for us as Sisters of Charity of New York to understand. I think we're learning about it because we are a congregation that had tremendously big institutions. I mean, we, the Sisters of Charity, sponsored these institutions. And now, you know, we've had to let go of them. And so it's very hard to understand, wow, the Metro New York Catholic Climate Movement, it's part of who we are as Sisters of Charity because we, not only am I involved, but others are involved through our support and involvement. So it's a letting go of owning and it's moving into, it's a we. So let me stop there and others might have some other ideas. I'll look at the chat box.
Thank you, Patricia. I think we just have one more question from Tenon, and I think that would be a good question to wrap it up if you don't have anything else to add. Sorry, Carol. So I will read out Tenon's question, and Tenon's question is for Lydia specifically, and that would be, you know, one second. So what would you consider the most effective means of starting a conversation about homelessness, especially among young people? Lydia, you have added a few, I think like a very short answer for that. Could you please expand on that? And building off Tenon's question too, you know, is how did you tackle the stigma around, you know, homelessness? Because some people don't even want to talk about that, right? For some people, it isn't even that, okay, I do want to talk about that because I know there is a solution. For some people, it's really that it's such an uncomfortable issue when I see a person who's experiencing homelessness outside of a store that I intentionally ignored, you know, even knowing that I have, I don't know, some money allocated or like some money that I can provide or like some other type of help that I can, you know, for sure going to make this issue, you know, better or like to help towards this issue, right? So building off that question, I will repeat, you know, what would you consider the most effective means of starting a conversation about homelessness, especially among young people? The floor is yours, Lydia.
Great, thank you. So the first question, you know, around starting conversations with homelessness. Homelessness is one of these sort of social problems that we all have come to accept. And you know, to kind of, you know, maybe we see it, maybe we don't see it, maybe we ignore it, maybe we deliberately turn away, but all of us to some degree are comfortable with it, right? And so starting the conversation with a little bit of inspiration and a little bit of hope to say, actually, homelessness can be ended. We know how. There's loads of research on what causes homelessness, what the solutions are, and many communities around the world are seeing progress in addressing homelessness. And actually, even through the pandemic, some communities have used this health crisis as a catalyst to drive incredible progress on ending homelessness. In London, and really across the UK, they brought 23,000 people off the streets and out of shelters in a matter of 2 months. You know, so starting from that point of inspiration and that point of learning and education, and you'll get people who disagree with you, but you're beginning to start the conversation. And I think, you know, young people are huge believers in the idea that they can make a change and that, you know, there's power in community and there's power through government in order to make these changes. So I'd start with some roundtables, you know, if young people, you know, bring in some pizzas or something like that, you know, and get the conversation started, and then always end that conversation with, you know, here's how you can get involved on this issue. So there's, IGH has a resource hub. It's ighhub.org, and we have tons of resources there that you can use on those conversations. And then in terms of the stigma or the discomfort that we feel when we see people who are experiencing homelessness, that's actually exactly how I got started working on this issue. When I moved to Chicago 10 years ago this month, it was my first time really living in an urban environment. And every day when I got off the train to walk to my office, I would pass 6, 7 people sitting on the street, asking for money, asking for help. And I wasn't in a position at that time to, give money, to every single person who was asking for it. And so, my way of, responding to that was to get involved with some organizations that were serving people who were homeless. So that allowed me to sleep at night, knowing that I could see them, I can empathize with their plight, and I'm finding ways to be positively involved in the issue that work for me, that work for my resources, my time, my financial resources, those sorts of things. So, and I think too, people who are experiencing homelessness are so familiar with that blank stare and that hardened face as we walk by. So even if you're not able to, give someone a coin or something like that, still just looking them in the eyes and smiling is a really important way of dignifying their experience. And I think that's very Vincentian, right? Like St. Vincent did not look away. He reached out. He looked for ways to help people who were on the margins. So